And I'll now move us through into the Q&A panel, and we have started to get some questions in. So I'll move straight into those. So our first question is, how are you planning to promote to the public free... Sorry, I'll start again. How are you planning to promote the public free-to-use complaints facility more widely? And it talks that there's relatively low public awareness. And I think it's important to say that the OEP will have its own independent press and communications team, and that will be ramping up as we sort of become more mature and become sort of further along our journey into being sort of fully operational. And there's been a lot of work done around making sure that we're explaining that complaints process and the complaints policy is easy to find on the website and easy to follow with clear guidance. I think we would also very much be looking to our stakeholders to help us share some of that messaging around that complaints policy and sort of use their networks to get those messages out as well. But I think there are probably some more immediate priorities for us in terms of the strategy and getting some of the thinking and processes in place that will help us make best use of our complaints policy and process. And the eagle-eyed amongst you will probably spot we have a new panel member who hasn't been part of the presentations, and that's our General Counsel, Peter Ashford. And I'll probably just hand over to you, Peter, to see if there's anything you want to add about those the bits of the strategy and those legal tests that we need to have in place before we can really get best use of the complaints process.
Yeah, thank you, Mike, and thank you, Ruth, for the question. I think we definitely want to be an open, accessible and known to the public as an organisation. And so we will in due course be using tools like our website and social media to promote ourselves and the fact that we exist and have a job to do that provides that service. But as Mike says, I think it's important that we recognise we need to get the right policies and procedures in place through the strategy and enforcement policy before we really move on to the next stage in our journey and development. And that's what we're here seeking to do.
Thank you, Peter. Okie doke. I'll move on to the next question, which is that prioritising the OEP's work in part by how large an effect it will have makes sense, but it will be tricky. So how will the scale of effect impact be assessed? And Natalie, can I direct that one to you, please?
Of course you can, Mike, and thank you for a very insightful question there, Chris. And you're quite right, it will be tricky, and in some respects being an issue-based and adopting an issue-based strategy is the harder path. We know that information and evidence in relation to any of the issues that we are assessing will inevitably be imperfect, and we know that we will have to exercise judgment in relation to that information if we are not to suffer from undue delay. So we will do the best we can with the information that we have available to us. We will make some limited extra inquiries if we need to, and we're making those assessments. And we will develop and evolve our bank of understanding and knowledge as we progress as an organisation. But you'll see set out in our strategy an acknowledgement of the fact that often we will be making judgments on the basis of imperfect information. But nonetheless, we think it is really important before we embark on a particular area of prioritisation to really assess the impact that we think we can have.
Thank you, Natalie. Okie doke. Next question. The strategy and enforcement policy are both very helpful, but they are technical, detailed documents. How is the OEP ensuring wider public feedback and that accessibility or transparency of process are fully considered in the consultation? So I'll have the first stab at that one in my sort of role as head of comms. One of the things that we are looking into is whether or not we can do some targeted public engagement forum type events to broaden that reach. But I think it is fair to say that the nature of our work means we really do need to hear from that informed, experienced, knowledgeable sector in a sort of first priority. And then, as Peter has sort of alluded to in a previous answer, wider promotion from there through social media, through the comms planning, the comms team. But as I've said, also we'll be looking to do some targeted work with the public. It is a challenge, I think, getting that kind of technical and detailed and very specialised sort of area of work out into that general public. But it is something that has been identified as a priority for us, and as something that certainly the board want us to take forward. Natalie, can I just go to you and see if there's anything you want to add on that question, please?
Thank you, Mike. Firstly, I would say that enforcement policies are inevitably technical documents, and ours is no different. And that's because enforcement is a legalistic and complex business, and we don't make any apologies for that. And what we are focusing on is our publicly accessible pages. We're investing time in our website, in accessibility testing of the parts of our website deliberately targeted at members of the public. And as we progress from our strategy, which very much is describing how we'll undertake our work, as we move into our corporate plan, which will set out the focuses, the what we are going to do with our strategic approach, we will work extremely hard to ensure that we are accessing all of the perspectives that we need to do our job. And that's particularly relevant when we look at the particular adverse environmental impacts on people, on people's health and people's well-being. So we are on something of a journey, and this is the first step. And as we progress, as Mike says, we'll be looking to engage increasingly widely to help us make the choices that we need to do, and to make, in particular, our complaints portal fully accessible.
Thank you, Natalie. Next question I'll go to. Will the OEP be able to provide assistance to members of the public to understand and navigate the large body of environmental law that public authorities must comply with? And I think, talking around the large body of environmental law, I was going to direct that question to our General Counsel, Peter. If you would like to attempt that one.
Yep. Thank you, Mike. And again, thank you, Lucy, for the question. I think the short answer here is we will play our part. The slightly longer answer, perhaps, is that as an organisation, with the resources we have and the remit we have, of course, we have an element of what we can do in terms of providing assistance for members of the public, particularly members of the public who access our complaints service. But it can only ever be one element of understanding that large and complex body of environmental law. So we will, and in fact we already do, signpost complainants who come to us not quite understanding what public authorities are responsible for what. So we will signpost to the correct public authorities to take their complaints to in the first instance. And in due course, we're developing our website, and we hope to include on the website useful information at a reasonably high level, admittedly, as to which public authorities are responsible for broadly which areas of environmental law. So we do want to play our part, and we do want to make best use of the tools we have available to communicate with the public and provide information to the public that supports us in our role.
Thank you, Peter. I'll keep going with the questions. There's one which I think I've missed out, so I'll go back to. As you state that your office will advise government councils, etc., on environmental law and policy, should you offer your help to Stormont and Northern Ireland government on their strategy and proposed environment bill? Now, I think Emma may well have covered some of that, all that to a certain extent in her piece. But Natalie, is there anything you just want to add to that one before we move on?
Thank you, Mike. So many of you will be aware that we are waiting final confirmation of our Northern Ireland remit from the Northern Ireland Assembly, and we anticipate having that next month. But until that is finalised, we can't preempt that decision. But specifically, turning to the Northern Ireland Environment Strategy, it would fall within our statutory remit to monitor against that strategy, and we have been asked to provide advice to Stormont. We are considering what that advice should be at the moment. And so I suppose that the answer to the question is that we will offer our help, indeed have been asked for our help. And once our Northern Ireland remit is absolutely confirmed, we will get on with doing exactly that.
Thank you, Natalie. And I've just spotted there's a sort of related question that I can come straight back to you again with, which is, will there be specific OEP staff dedicated to Northern Ireland matters once Assembly has approved. Obviously, we can't preempt that. And are there plans for North-South cooperation on matters including transboundary effects? Can I put that to you, Natalie, please?
Yes, you can. So we are working with our colleagues in Northern Ireland at the moment in parallel with the decision making about the OEP's remit for Northern Ireland. Our current intent is to integrate our Northern Ireland work into the main body of the OEP. So we don't have an England team and a Northern Ireland team. We have a single OEP with remit over the two jurisdictions. And that's because in large part our role in Northern Ireland under the Environment Act is broadly the same as our role in England, and we will need to draw on the same breadth of capabilities across the OEP for Northern Ireland as we would for England. So we wouldn't look to replicate a team. We would want to be able to draw on the full capacity of the OEP to focus on Northern Ireland matters in the same way that they would in England. In relation to the transboundary question, there is no short answer to that. Issues of devolved environmental law and the transboundary issues apply in England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, and within Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland there are even further complications around consistency of law there. It is a matter that we will need to take into account on a case-by-case basis. It isn't straightforward and it is now impossible to extract general principles. What we will need to do in relation to specific Northern Ireland matters, and indeed sometimes in England as well, where there are transboundary issues within the United Kingdom, is consider those on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you, Natalie. There's one question which is around whether or not people will be able to access the slides after this presentation. What I would say is that this is being recorded and will be available to view after the event, and we'll make sure that link is readily available on the website for people. But if anyone does want the slides, I can take an undertaking to make sure that happens. So I'll take that one on. Next sort of substantial question, how is the OEP going to promote, address EDI as part of its strategy, and what role do you see yourselves playing in providing sector leadership on this important issue? And I think, Natalie, I have to put you back on the spot for that one, please.
That's quite all right, Mike. I invite some of my fellow panel members. So we have taken equality, diversity and inclusion extremely seriously as we have grown the organisation. In the first part, we wanted to recruit a staff that brought real diversity of perspective and experience into the OEP. And we have done that cognizant that the environmental sector is a sector that really does struggle with diversity across a number of different areas, and we have certainly experienced that. We have done the best we can in terms of making the OEP an inclusive and representative organisation. There is more to do, however, and at the moment, as we move to full functional independence, we have commissioned internal work within the OEP to really focus on how we can make the OEP a genuinely inclusive organisation in how we work and how we work with each other. And more broadly, and I think a number of you have raised questions about how the general public can engage with the OEP. More broadly, we are mindful of the particular disproportionate impacts that there can be on certain groups with sharing particular protected characteristics arising from environmental harm. And this is something that will be a relevant factor in relation to how we assess seriousness, particularly through the lens of threats to people's health and well-being. So it is a challenge. It is going to remain a challenge as it is for so many of us in this particular sector. I think we have made good steps in the right direction, but undoubtedly there is more to do, and there will continue to be more to do on an ongoing basis. We are always open to hearing from you, from our stakeholders. We are always open to hearing new ideas and suggestions. So please do. I know many of you do when you engage with us directly, and we will continue to be interested in hearing from you.
Thank you, Natalie. Let me have a look what we've got. Thank you for this event. The consultations the OEP has already taken part in. It's very welcomed, especially the publicising of our responses. Keen to hear more about consultations that OEP can and will take part in, appreciating prioritisation. So I think I have to go to you again, Natalie, in terms of obviously prioritisation is a key part of the strategy that we're now consulting on. Are there any sort of other plans to do any more work around that, or will this be the sort of fundamental piece of work to set our approach on prioritisation? And feel free to bring in any of your colleagues if you wish.
Thank you, Mike. So I'll start, but I'll invite my colleague Emma Hawthorne, who leads on this area of work for us a lot of the time. So the OEP, until very recently, was in interim form. Our full powers only came into force yesterday, and that includes our ability to provide formal advice to government. It is our intent to use our voice wisely and to invest in making sure that when we do provide advice, it is sound, well analysed, well supported by evidence, advice given at the right time to be influential. What that means for us is an active programme of forward planning and prioritisation around the principles that we've set out in our consultation. So those things that we can make the most difference. And yes, we may well respond to public consultations, but I think most of the time our preference will be to use our statutory advice function where that is appropriate and timely. But Emma is our expert here on the panel today, so I will invite Emma to pick that up and add her very expert view.
Thank you, Natalie. So yes, my team is responsible for this work area, and we do screen consultations every week. So we're aware of what consultations are coming out, and we're aware it's an extremely busy time at the moment with a lot of things coming out of the Environment Act. So as Natalie said, prioritisation will be key. How we continue to screen those consultations going forward will be informed by our strategy. So please give us your views on our prioritisation approach. But just to say, the consultations that we don't respond to, we're considering how we might track those, because it will be important for us to know what happened after those consultations occurred and what government did next, what the next steps were. So it's all work currently in train. So yes, interested in people's view on our prioritisation approach. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. And I think we've got one more question to cover, and it is one which I know has sort of been one subject to a lot of internal discussion within the OEP, which is how do we consider broader aspects such as socio-economic factors alongside our environmental objectives? Again, I think I'll probably start with you, Natalie, on that one, and see where you want to go from there.
Thank you, Mike. And inevitably, that's a challenging question to provide a general answer to. In relation to the work that we do, so often in making an assessment, the factors that we have to balance will be very context specific. And that means that in certain circumstances, socioeconomic factors might be relevant, in others maybe less so. It's also will depend as well in relation to the functions that we are exercising. So I might invite our General Counsel, Peter Ashford, to flesh out a little bit, in particular when we're making enforcement decisions, which are decisions that can often be that much more carefully balanced in terms of how we choose to take forward actions.
Yes, thank you, Natalie. And as Natalie says, this has been an area we've been considering alongside the development of the enforcement policy and the strategy, and to what extent the factors that we've set out in the documents for consultation encompass the broadest possible range of factors that could be relevant to our decision making. So, of course, we start from the fact that our principal objective and our mission is around protecting the environment, holding government and other public authorities to account against their environmental commitments. But in seeking to make judgments on that and prioritise and approach some of the legal tests that we need to approach, it will be very case specific, but there will be cases where, taking account of all the relevant factors, we need to take into account the social, the economic and the environmental implications of the behaviour we're observing or the actions we may or may not take. And we have to do that in a proportionate and rounded way. That's hopefully what we've set out in our strategy and enforcement policy, but as others have said, we're very keen to hear what stakeholders think about that and where they think we could improve.
Thank you, Peter. And David has just snuck a question in just as I was about to wrap up the questions, and I think another one has just landed as well. So regarding the tricky issue of predicting impact when deciding priorities, is this in part a question of identifying critical issues where progress is most likely to be attained by exercising the OEP's powers and strategic functions? Andy is nodding. But I'll start with Natalie, and then you may wish to bring Andy in. But I think that is quite comprehensively set out in the draft strategy. So anything to add to that, Natalie, starting with you?
Thanks, Mike. And David, I think you have hit the nail exactly on the head. That is exactly the intent of our strategy. The OEP has the ability to undertake certain activities. We have the powers that we have. Sometimes those activities will be ideally placed to drive meaningful change. And in other circumstances, our activities would not have that effect. And in our strategy, what we are trying to set out is a methodology for us to find those issues where the OEP can make the biggest difference through our activity. And so it's a little bit to add to what you've said, because I think you've absolutely nailed what we are trying to achieve. But I'll ask Andy to flesh that out a little bit if he's got anything he wants to add.
All I was going to say was yes. I think that in answer to that question, it's simple. Yes, I think the answer is you've said it's a succinct description of what indeed we're trying to achieve. So nothing beyond that.
Thanks, Andy. Okie doke. There is one question left, and actually it gives Natalie a break. This one is for Dame Glenys, again from Ruth. So I wonder if Dame Glenys might say a few words on the strategic importance of transparency in maintaining credibility and forming organisational culture.
Yes, I'm very happy indeed to do that. Thank you, Ruth, and good afternoon to you. And thank you, everyone who's asked such interesting questions. So I think it's plain when you read our strategy that what we are seeking to be is a credible organisation and to do the best that we can for the environment with the skills, the capability and capacity that we have. And there are some important attributes that we need to possess and develop in order to be credible. And a lot of those are actually related to the culture of our organisation. Yes, how we treat each other, how we treat others, how we work, how responsive we are, those sort of attributes that we want to see develop and grow. For me, it's really important that as an organisation, we do what I call active listeners. That isn't just listening for the sake of it, it's actually hearing it and exploring with people what they are saying to us and what they're telling us. And active listening is so important. We've started off, I think, and on a good footing, and I think you've recognised that, Ruth. Thank you very much. And we will always try and actively listen. That's the first thing. Secondly, we do need to engage with as many groups and individuals as possible. We're beginning to do that, but there is so much more that we can do. And now that Mike Fox is with us and we're getting a bit of extra resource, we hope to do yet more there. So engagement is so right. We know that to be credible, we've got to make the best possible decisions. And this consultation and our strategy is all about that, really, about how we will prioritise, how we'll know what's serious, how we'll use the powers that we have to best effect to make the best possible difference, yes, David, that we, the OEP, can make to the environment. So making good decisions is really important. Using our powers astutely, not always thinking the answer is enforcement, and it may be that sometimes we have to use a number of our powers at any one time, or sometimes just influence will do. So being astute about how we work, which powers we use once we get to the point where we prioritise an issue, that will be so critical to our success, I think. But yes, you're absolutely right. Being a transparent organisation will be critically important. Now, not sure Natalie and I think there's any other way to be in the modern day in the public sector. I suspect our General Counsel Peter will give us wise advice when we do need to be a little bit careful so as not to scupper an enforcement matter, for example. And I think our enforcement policy is quite clear in our commitment to transparency, but not at a cost to successful enforcement. But otherwise, of course, we will wish to be as transparent as we possibly can. If we're not, we're only going to brew suspicion, aren't we, about what we're up to. So yes, transparency will be critical for us, and hopefully we've started as we need to go on in that respect. Thank you.
Thank you, Dame Dennis, and thank you to all my colleagues on the panel for their answers to these questions. That pretty much brings us to the end of the questions, I think. I know we're running a little bit ahead of time. I think we all got a bit of red light fever and maybe spoke more quickly than we did in rehearsals, but that's no bad thing. I know time is precious, and we're very grateful for all of those who've joined us for this event this afternoon. Before I sort of hand over to Natalie just for some concluding remarks and to bring the afternoon to a close, I guess it's just important to make sure that you all know how to access the consultation. So it is live on the OEP website, which is www.theoep.org.uk. There's also a link to it from the sort of landing page or the homepage of this event. And you can respond to the consultation online, and there's also an email address and a document you can do sort of not through the portal, but just email as your response. And the email address for our consultations is consultations@theoep.org.uk. And just a little thing, but you might notice that that's an OEP email address, as we're now moving into our own IT and OEP emails. It's the little things, but they aren't. I will now hand over to Natalie just to bring the event to a close for us.